So I'd like to call this meeting to order at 2:02 on 4/19/2021. Could we please do a roll call of our members to establish a quorum? Mr. Hill?
Here.
Ms. Turner?
Here.
Ms. Norton? Donna, are you here? Yeah? You having trouble with your microphone?
Here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I believe that gives us a quorum. And I will turn over the introduction of committee members, board staff, and board legal counsel to Ms. Yamaguchi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With us today, we have our enforcement chief, Antoinette Wood. We have, pardon me, our AEO, Vicki Lyman. We have, of course, our SNEC, Marie Cordero. We have all the NECs, Charlene De La Rosa, Judith McLeod, Jessica Gomez, Faye Silverman, Cindy Fairchild, and Beth DeYoung. Now, not panelists just yet, of course. We have Arlene Nunez, we have Doris Piers, our ledge analyst. We have Geraldine Morosino, who's our education analyst. And scrolling on down, I believe that is it for staff. I'm sure there's other people who will be popping in and out. Council?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Ken Swenson, General Counsel to the board.
Hello, this is Sheila Tatayan. I'm the Regulations Counsel.
Excellent, thank you. I'd just like to welcome everybody and say how much I appreciate everyone coming and the input. And I believe that this is, Mr. Hill, is this your first meeting?
Yes, this is. I'm very excited.
Welcome. Oh, we're excited to have you here. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Yamaguchi for possible approval of the committee meeting minutes, January 11, 2021.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The draft notes of the meeting were in your packet.
Yes, sir.
I don't know that there's any changes. We have, of course, as usual, the timestamps for the actual recording of the discussion listed on the minutes. So with that, if there were any questions or suggestions, I'd be happy to try and answer.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Turner. I second that. Can we have a roll call vote for approval? Ms. Norton?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Turner?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So that was unanimous approval. Let's move on to number 5, discussion and possible action to make recommendations to the board on 2021 rulemaking proposals regarding vocational nursing and psychiatric technician programs and scopes of practice. Ms. Yamaguchi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this is an exciting development. And by the way, just as a footnote, I can't tell you how pleased I am that Mr. Hill's joined the committee, because now we've got both a seasoned VN and a seasoned PT to help us with the discussion of the educational programs and the scopes of practice. So what we had discussed here in the staff was well, a number of different things, and this is really kind of just a preface, because I think this is really something that is going to be a substantial and lengthy conversation for months yet to come. So as the committee will remember, we've talked a bit about quite a magnum opus undertaking of basically examining and analyzing and updating our regulations with regard to school approval. Pardon me. It's been a bad allergy day. It's been a long time since our regs were were really substantially looked at and updated. And as you know, from the past year or so, a whole lot of things have come up that really, I think, have pushed us to need to do a good amount of rethinking and reevaluating, and I think recommitting ourselves. And while I think we've talked a bit about the programmatic aspects, the schools and the approval process and things, what we have not discussed just yet, it has been an examination and discussion of our existing scopes of practice. And while I don't know that there's anything that I would suggest we change per se, I think it's eminently appropriate that the board really take a critical look at those scopes. And as I said, I was really happy to have both Ms. Norton and Mr. Hill, so that not to steal your thunder, Madam Chair, but possibly to ask for some focused assistance and work from those two board members on their specific scopes, because I think we would be very well served to really look at what our psych techs and our VNs are doing in their day-to-day practice, and are there areas that perhaps our scope is fuzzy or outdated or lacking. And I think that extends naturally one way, and actually back and forth in the way that our educational programs and the curriculum and the requirements for the programs are constructed. Are they the correct formula? Are they in need of any kind of tweaking? Because, and remember that the programs themselves have the capacity and the ability and the prerequisite to basically kind of configure their educational programs as they see fit, as long as it meets those overall standards that are in our regs. So like I said, I wanted this to be kind of a preface conversation to what I think is going to be quite a long process. Because I think you've seen some of our initial thoughts about the overall Article 4 and Article 5 for both practice acts having to do with the schools and the prep, but not so much any beginnings of thought on our scopes, the appropriate scopes. So with that, let me pause if anybody has some questions or would like to jump on in with some opinions.
I just want to second that. I'm really excited to have two seasoned, one psych tech and one LVN, because I think they're going to be instrumental as this conversation goes forward. I was just in a statewide meeting last week where they were talking about this very thing and really looking at how to align things so that there's that smooth transition. We've all talked about CNA, LVN, LVN, RN, RN, BSN, BSN master's degree within all of nursing. And I think that scope of practice is part of that discussion.
Wonderful. And I'm so glad you mentioned that whole channel, if you will, because I think one thing that I know has been discussed on a lot of different venues has been how do we best prepare licensees and future licensees to advance? I mean, are there ways that we could help standardize certain parts of the CNA curriculum to the VN curriculum and PT curriculum to the RN curriculum to the APRN curriculum? So I think, like I said, this is a longer conversation, but like I said, I'd be really interested in hearing any preliminary thoughts.
So this is Donna. Oh, go ahead, Abraham.
Oh, sorry, Donna. It's my fault. You go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'll jump in here. As you're probably all aware, this has been something that I've been wanting to discuss. And so I'll preface it by saying that I believe there's a critical piece that we're missing here. And that is that, and I could be totally off base here, but we have Abraham, who's a seasoned PT, and you have me, who I am a seasoned LVN, but my experience as an LVN for the last 30 years has been in the outpatient clinic setting. So I have a vast amount of experience there. I have limited experience in the hospitals, and even further limited experience in the skilled nursing facilities. With that being said, I do think that if we're going to take a serious look at this, we may want to invite some LVNs that are working in the skilled nursing facilities to get their perspective on whether or not our scope is fuzzy, outdated, or lacking, to get a well-rounded picture. I will say that for the experience that I've had, it doesn't appear that the curriculum or the experience or the training that's provided prepares people for the outpatient world. And I can say that because we have a lot of LVNs that come in and they're not ready to deal with the challenges provided in the outpatient world where they have to where they're acting somewhat independently, but not independently. So they are still working under the license of the doctor or the RN, but there's a lot of individual thinking that has to be done, and that gets confusing when it bucks up against scope versus skill versus policy. The other thing that I think we must take a look at is, and I've mentioned this before, there is a purposeful, well, I wouldn't say, maybe it's not purposeful. We do seem in the outpatient world to be regulated by both, and probably on the inpatient, on the skilled nursing facilities as well. We seem to be prohibited by both our scope and by the RN's interpretation of our scope as to the being able to work to the full scope of our license. Whether that, and there's this ongoing thing about whether an LVN can assess, collect data, and where do they manipulate the fact? Where do they manipulate those things? So I do think that we have some work to do, and I would love to see, and although I understand that the scope language is broad and gray on purpose, I don't think it's beneficial to the experience that our LVNs are currently having. And then I also think that with the advent of telemedicine, I think we have to be more, we have to look at that in a broader scope. I was involved in attempting to set up a cooperative for LVNs so that we could meet the need of the patient, but we ran into some hiccups along the way with the ability to interface. And so I think as telemedicine goes forward, we need to take a look at that. So that's my nickel's worth. And I'll just stop there. Thank you.
This is Abraham Hill, and thank you, Donna. I really agree with a lot of the points that Donna had brought up. And from the psych tech perspective, I'd like to, number one, say it's serendipitous, I think, for me to be in this first meeting and for this discussion to happen here. I am really looking forward to exploring the scope of practice for not only the psych tech, but also for the LVN. And what I do look forward to is not only looking into improving on the services that both professions can provide, but also looking into the innovations that we can take a look at. And the telemetry, I'm really excited about. Currently, the huge majority of my work as a psych tech is to provide crisis intervention services through virtual meetings. And part of my responsibilities with the Department of Developmental Services is to come up with recommendations for folks who are in crisis, anywhere from self-injurious behavior to suicide precautions. And from my ability to be able to provide recommendations that are therapeutic for folks virtually, it had been a challenge in the very beginning, but we have found some very great outcomes, positive outcomes, where people don't have to be admitted through acute psychiatric facilities, or maybe even having families call the police because of a crisis situation they're having at home. There's just so many things that I'm very excited about in being able to review our scope of practice. And hopefully, I hope this is the place to start looking into maybe where the LVN has a bridge program to the psychiatric, an LVN bridge program to an RN. I believe there are bridge programs for the psych tech to the RN. I haven't really personally looked into it, but I can see, especially with the exploration of a name change of our psych tech title, that maybe there'd be an easier way for psych techs to get into that RN licensure. I'm really looking forward to where our discussions are going to lead, and maybe innovate our scope of practice.
Abraham, just to kind of clarify, there aren't hardly any psych tech to RN programs in the state of California. And of course, beyond here, there aren't really very many psych tech programs. So I definitely think
Yes.
that's something that needs to be looked at. And we certainly do not have enough LVN to RN transition opportunities for LVNs in this state. It's definitely a lack, and something that hopefully we're going to be looking at the state level as well as individual school levels.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Mountain. I'm really looking forward to exploring that, making that more of a possibility.
As it should be.
This is Cheryl Turner. Don't forget about the public member as someone from the public with some medical legal background. I am interested in participating in the discussions as well.
Awesome. Ms. Yamaguchi?
Thank you. And those were some great opening comments. And, I think then that rather than make a subcommittee or two subcommittees, we would probably want to keep this a project of the committee as a whole. But I love Miss Norton's idea of expanding this out, because I know that there are certainly
Elaine, this
yes.
is the moderator. I'm getting an echo from your microphone.
Oh, that's odd. I don't quite know why.
You're good now.
Okay, good. Maybe it was just me. But where was I? Oh, yes. Miss Norton's suggestion of possibly bringing in some other outside advisory groups, or excuse me, individuals who represent other facets of the really diverse practices for both the psych techs and the VNs. I think that's a terrific idea. So we've got a good amount of work to go to, and I'm sure that the NECs and our council and our legend regs coordinator are all just thinking, what in the world is that woman thinking again? But no, I think to start this conversation, it's obvious, the regulatory process itself takes a little while to get language in front of the board, and then through the process itself, it'll take a little while. So I wouldn't expect us to see anything move concretely in this year. Much more likely to place it on the 2022 calendar for some real earnest work. But no, I'm really excited then to hear the enthusiasm from the committee. And so at this point in time, what I think I would recommend is the staff will look into some, study questions to put before the group as a whole. Does that sound like a good step forward?
Absolutely.
Sounds like a great place to start.
So Elaine, I'm also wondering if we can ask the NECs to put together or what the most common questions the board receives from employers as far as, can an LVN do this? Can an LVN do that? It might be a good jumping off point to find where we need to clarify our language a bit more, or what the misconceptions are regarding the employers, or what our LVNs and psych techs are doing that they shouldn't be doing. So that might be a good jumping off point.
That's a great point. One of the things that we had been working on at various stages was really kind of putting together that real ground level information piece. I had envisioned using it in terms of educating the legislature, but really I think to discuss and really explain the difference between a CNA, a physician's assistant, a VN, an RN, a psych tech, and really kind of, I think, have that in real plain language so that people can go, oh, okay, now I see where these people work. But I like your idea too, and I know that the NECs have at least some cursory records because they chart all the scope questions we get in. So I know there's probably
Elaine,
yes, ma'am.
sorry to interrupt, but your microphone is echoing again.
I just don't understand.
Can you speak back just a little bit? From
I'm
the
pretty far
microphone?
back, actually. All right. So, okay. So anyways, the short answer, Ms. Norton, of course, is yeah, I think that would be a terrific idea. And Ms. Cordero and the NECs and I will discuss this. Madam Chair?
Thank you. Are we ready to move to number 6? Discussion and possible action to make recommendations to the board on strategic planning. Ms. Yamaguchi.
Thank you. This is actually a note to the committee that we're kind of having to defer some action. Initially, we had talked about the committees each doing a fairly in-depth analysis and status check on our strategic plan and goals, topic by topic. Our original idea was to do this at the May board meeting, but the May board meeting is so compacted that we've pushed this back to at least the August meeting and possibly longer, because I suspect that we would need to have the board approve an amended strategic plan and have it take effect in January 1 of 22. But like I said, this was like, again, a placeholder, because what we had wanted to do was was really, I think, divvy up the pieces of the education practice strategic planning and have staff work with either the committee as a whole, or if people wanted to, call out a specific piece of it and work more on an individual basis. But we should have, I think, something on paper very shortly. And so if we are planning to have our next committee meet in, say, early July, mid-July, we should be able to have a pretty robust conversation at that point. And I would pause here for questions. Great.
Elaine, can you speak a little bit more about initially you were going to have each board member take a piece of it. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Oh, thank you. So as you'll remember, Donna, the strategic planning process was a pretty long term. It took us, the better part of a year to really look through and map out the goals and the landmarks and the timelines. So what we had been thinking of recommending, and again, it's a suggestion. It doesn't have to be this way, but if individual committee members or board members had a particular attachment to one chunk of the plan, or one specific goal or something, and wanted to, say, take that on as a more individual project to work with staff on, or whether the committee would want to work more as a whole with the whole of that section. And it actually, those aren't mutually exclusive either, because, you know, certainly different members can specialize certainly in a specific area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, thank you. That's what I recalled, but I was making sure because, you know, memories fade. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, are we ready for number 7? Discussion and possible action to make recommendations to the board on distance learning hybrid programs. Ms. Yamaguchi.
This is going to be fun, by the way. Not to cheat and spoil the surprise. The NECs have been working on this, and they have a bit of a presentation. But just to kind of set that conversation up, as you all recall, most of the schools made some contingency efforts to rearrange how they were teaching and how the programs were running over the past year. So inevitably, of course, right now, a lot of the programs have started to ask the NECs what it looked like to go forward. Could we just have all of our didactics online in perpetuity, or could we do this, could we do that? So a lot of the programs have been talking with their NECs about what a hybrid program might look like, what an acceptable program like that might be. And so again, like I said, the NECs have been talking a bit about this, and so I know Mr. Young has been elected to lead this conversation. So Beth?
Okay, so thank you. Can you hear me, Vicki?
Yes, Beth.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank you for allowing the NECs to share a few recommendations for the post-COVID-19 pandemic era, which we are all very anxious for. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted nursing education all over California in some way. In most cases, face-to-face teaching was converted to online learning, and clinical experiences became a challenge, putting it very mildly, to programs. As programs developed various plans to accomplish their clinical hours, the NECs were tasked with reviewing each and every plan prior to implementation by those programs. So although the NECs are very familiar with virtual clinical simulation products, they were also introduced to some new types of virtual clinical simulation programs, as well as online modalities. With the increased demand for online learning, there has been and probably will continue to be a rapid continued growth of these online learning platforms. The pandemic required program directors to be creative. They had to make instant changes to allow their students to continue moving forward in their programs, but it also has accelerated the conversation of the future of nursing education. It made that speed up quite a bit, actually. Directors have been asking very important questions as to what the BVNPT will allow post-pandemic. So curriculum revisions may be submitted in the future for the NECs to review, and that will include these various changes to teaching modalities and clinical experience. So as a group, the NECs, we're excited to discuss this future of nursing education. We are striving for consistency, however, with our recommendations during the review of possible submitted curriculums from all our programs. And we would like to have adequate time to research best practices for each method prior to reviewing those curriculums. During the previous board meeting, there was a webinar that was held. For those of you who were there, they shown examples of the different ways clinical experiences can be accomplished. There's also various modalities for theory. And to save time, I'm just going to briefly touch on a few. I'm not going to go into a lot of details because we kind of did that in the last meeting. But the first one was hybrid learning. If you could move to the next slide. Hybrid learning, the instructors and facilitators are teaching remotely and in person. So this method combines both synchronous and asynchronous methods, and a significant portion of this course takes place online, but hybrid learning may also involve both when the in-person and virtual students are attending class at the same time, especially has happened a lot during COVID, or students watching pre-recorded lectures. Next slide. The next one is blended learning. This is instructors and facilitators combine in-person instruction with online learning activities. So face-to-face class is supplemented with online materials. So FaceTime is not replaced by online course delivery, but it is meant to complement that in-person class learning. The next slide is flipped classroom. This is a form of blended learning. And this is where a student is first exposed to material, it's new material outside of the class, usually an activity, or maybe they have to read chapters. This is usually when they're at home. And then when the student comes back to attend class that's live in person, the class time is then used to apply that material that was learned at home in the form of problem solving and discussions to really help bring all of that together. And lastly, which we've been talking about quite a bit, is that virtual clinical simulation. And there are many programs out there, and like I said before, probably more to come. This is the recreation of that clinical reality on a computer screen, and this is to allow those students to increase their decision-making, their clinical practice, and their communication skills. Now, there's little as known at this time, meaning limited research about its effectiveness in regards to student learning, satisfaction, self-efficacy, knowledge retention, clinical reasoning. But as you can see here, these are just a few possible curricula change requests that may be submitted to the NECs in the future. So to be proactive, the NECs have been discussing that very important question, where do we go from here? And meaning post-COVID-19. So we came up with three recommendations moving forward. And next slide, please. So the very first recommendation, next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so is continue to approve live clinical simulation for the clinical hours in the skills lab on an individual basis per the clinical simulation guidelines that are currently available. So this practice was pre-pandemic, so we definitely want to recommend that this continues. And this is live clinical simulation within the skills lab, having the students on campus with, it's basically kind of like a program when they get it approved. It's a clinical simulation program in their skills lab. The second recommendation would be on your next slide. And this is to allow programs to request 100% online theory for their current theory hours. And this is a synchronous class. This is 100% live lecture online. This is no change to their curriculum. This is only a change in their teaching modality. And again, they would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, but this is what a lot of the programs are currently doing during the COVID-19 pandemic. They just basically move their in-class lecture online. And so that is a recommendation from the NECs. And the third recommendation is on the next slide. And this is further discussion that the NECs feel is needed prior to accepting program requests for that permanent curriculum change with either virtual clinical simulation, the blended, hybrid, flipped classroom. There's multiple online teaching strategies as well as multiple clinical simulation programs, softwares, those kind of things out there. So the NECs really support the future possible changes in nursing education, although it's really important that we are consistent with their curriculum reviews and our recommendations, and we have adequate time to review best practices, current available research for all these various modalities that are out there. And so the last slide is questions or comments. Again, thank you for your time and allowing us to discuss this very important topic and share some of the NEC's thoughts that we've had.
Hi, Beth. Thank you. This is Donna. So thank you for the presentation. Can you go back to the previous slide? So I think I tracked with you through this presentation, although I'm not sure what this one means. And I mean this wholeheartedly. You have a recommendation for further discussion. Can you speak more about that? Like, is there a path that you're thinking about? Is that I don't quite know what this means.
No, I actually understand that. So when the NECs are approving curriculum currently, we're all very consistent on maybe recommendations that we offer the directors, assistants help. When it comes to all these various changes that may come our way, if the board obviously is going to move forward in that direction, the NECs really need to come together to make sure that we are consistent. We want to make sure that each NEC is saying the same thing and that we're approving the same thing. And I'm just going to give you a small example. A small example would be when if they're going to do, say, a hybrid online theory type curriculum, they have to assign certain amount of hours for each activity or maybe a discussion board post, or it gets very detailed. I mean, I could talk about this for a very long time, but and we want to make sure we're all consistent with that. So not one NEC is approving a curriculum for, X amount of hours for these activities. And we really want to have those discussions to make sure that we're all on the same page. And that we can help directors when they come to us and ask questions, because this may be their first time creating a curriculum such as this, any either hybrid, flipped classroom, that kind of thing, because our regulations state that there are 576 theory hours to be accomplished in a VN program. That's just the VNs for an example. So they have to come up with that curriculum, and some of that time may not be in class, which is easily counted for. They have to do the outside online activities, etc. Does that kind of help?
It does. So will you be having further discussion and then coming back? So like in my mind's eye, I'm thinking that you're gonna get together with the NECs and go like, all right, we would allow this much of a flipped classroom. And so if a director was asking for a flipped classroom, it would already be determined that this is how much it would be. Same for hybrid, same for a clinical simulation. If one school can have a certain amount of clinical simulation, it would make sense that a different school would have the same amount of clinical simulation. So that you were going to come up with recommendations for all of these, or are they all going to be dependent upon an individual school and therefore they wouldn't be consistent?
Okay, so two-part question. The first part is that when we review a curriculum, we would not be making it a standard, because we do look at each school individually. And what we really go back to is the objectives, the clinical objectives, and how long it would take to accomplish that objective. And again, this is going to be a new thing for an NEC to be receiving these curriculums. And yes, we have already started to talk about it and the things that we need to get together on as NECs. I guess the biggest concern is if the board was to go forth with allowing these types of modalities, we would just ask that the NECs have that time before the curriculum started coming our way, which they are starting to come a little bit, that we can come together to make sure that we're all on the same page. But each individual program is looked at differently because of their objectives. So we would look at one objective and see what the director submitted for the time and the skill or the activity for that objective. That's why it wouldn't be so much like a standard for each one, because we've never been able to do standards because every program is so different. But there are so many types of virtual clinical that we kind of need to learn a little bit about. There's a lot of maybe NECs that haven't worked with a hybrid or a blended. So we are asking for that short period of time before, if the board was to say, yes, we're going to move forward and allow these curriculums to be submitted and approved.
Can I jump in just for a second? I want to, because I think this will help Donna too. Right now, there's obviously a lot of beginning research going on to look at the results of the pandemic and this move to 100% online, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. The whole thing of the virtual clinical simulation, where does that fit in? And it's not just in VN and PT education, it's across the board, all the way up to a master's level in an RN program, because we haven't taught to the extent, we've always done some of these things, but not where we were forced to do the whole thing in the virtual world. And so they're just beginning to do some research, and there's more than one piece. Of course, we want to look at NCSBN and see where our test scores compared to what they were a year ago before the pandemic when we were teaching differently. But also, what's the student experience? Because the feedback that we're getting as directors is some students just don't learn well in the online environment, where other students just thrive. And so trying to find that middle ground, it is going to certainly be program by program and the way it's designed. You can look at this list and know that there's 50 different ways to design all these different types of modalities. Some are effective and some aren't. And this is a huge job for the NECs. And my hat's off to you guys for starting this discussion.
Thank you. That helped. I mean, it did help, and yet I guess maybe it's just the way that my brain works. So what I think I'm hearing is that the board needs to approve the curriculum, like approve these different simulations, blended, hybrid, and then if the board approves them for these curriculum changes, then the NECs are going to need more time to discuss how to implement it, and then look at the individual schools to determine what the needs are for those individual schools, as opposed to what I was originally thinking, and that is that the NECs would recommend to us that these different modalities be allowed. I mean, again, not being an educator, this is foreign to me, but my main concern is that we get the appropriate teaching, the appropriate schooling with the appropriate outcomes, and that the schools are essentially, while they are individual, that they are essentially treated fairly. That's my objective.
Madam Chair, if I could, this is Elaine. I think what Ms. Norton is saying is spot on here. I think, and council can correct me, our current law and regs actually would allow us to approve these programs as long as they are configured to the requirements, the curriculum requirements. At this point in time, I believe that we could actually approve a program to do some or any of these things. But what I think the NECs are talking about right now, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is really, I think, putting some real thought into designing some guidelines here about what each of these mean, what that has to look like, what, can and can't be done. But also, I think, really showing possibly some best case scenarios, possibly some best practices. But I think, again, I believe that we could go ahead and approve these things as long as they are consistent with our current regs. But to be more transparent and to be, I think, a little bit more progressive minded, what we, I think, are looking to do here is really expand our understanding here and talk through the existing parameters and how they can be slightly stretched or at least clarified. Am I getting that right, Beth?
Yes, and if I could remember correctly, in one of our past conversations, Mr. Swenson, if you want to help me on this one, but I believe that it was supposed to be brought to the board for discussion about these different types and before we move forward with it, but I could be wrong on that.
Well, as a general rule, if there is an interpretation of the existing regulations that's going to be used across the board in a uniform manner, that would have to be put in regulation or become part of a precedential decision, which would be an exception to the requirement for a regulation. However, what we're talking about here is some guidance by the committee and in turn the board to the NECs on the kinds of things that can be approved. Ultimately, the approval still rests with the board, but the NECs are making recommendations for the approval of some of these new concepts. So it would be appropriate for the board to give some direction on whether these concepts are something that the board would approve of, but then it would still have to be determined on a case-by-case basis going forward in the absence of an express regulation or a precedential decision.
Right. So if the intent here is to design kind of a framework or guidelines whereby the NECs have the ability to evaluate what a program is proposing and work with them to kind of more tightly configure that, and then it is presented to this committee and then the full board. That, is completely within our regulatory authority right now, but it behooves us to be really clear about this and to have those conversations in broad daylight.
All right.
I would like to ask, this is Abraham Hill, being the newest member here in the committee, what would be my responsibilities to make sure that I am clear on what the board is responsible for? I can imagine, I would love actually to hang out with a couple of NECs just to see and observe everything that goes on, especially with the new recommendations. So that's my question. What is my responsibility?
You can't imagine how happy I am to get that question. I love the idea of having not so much a hanging out with the NECs, but really I think maybe spending a little bit more time, the board as a whole, of discussing the process. And but I think there's probably an ample amount of background reading that we could find for you. So we could do both.
This is Cheryl Turner, and I have a question about recommendation number 1. Could you go back to that slide, please? All right. All right, continue to approve live clinical simulation for clinical hours. So we've had numerous presentations on clinical simulation versus actual patient contact. And so are you recommending any, is there any different change, or is there any changes in your recommendations on this topic? Or is it just the same? I mean, what percentage are you looking forward to having involving simulation versus actual patient contact?
Thank you for the question. This would be just continuing what we did pre-COVID pandemic. This is for the live clinical simulation in Skills Lab, and there is a guideline for directors of what they should try to submit when they're trying to get clinical simulation approved. And when the second question is, we're not asking for a certain percentage, we're just asking to continue because, again, each program is looked at individually, and it may just be a small section that they're asking for clinical simulation for, maybe just a few objectives. It could be, different content areas, whether it be med-surg, OBP, so every program is very different. And they're asking for a different amount of hours for each area. So we look at that individually. But this is something we did post, and we're looking at moving forward. We definitely want to continue to allow that. And then when we're looking at all the other modalities, we are positive for the future of nursing. We wanted to hear a little bit of what maybe the board members are thinking prior to us just moving forward into that. And we are looking at making additional recommendations. We just need to have a little bit more time as NECs together to make those recommendations on the various modalities. I hope that answered your question. I may have overtalked.
Well, no, I mean, thank you. So I was just So after listening to all the different presentations, are you thinking about making any adjustments to add more clinical simulation to the process?
Actually, if I could answer that question, if you don't mind, Mrs. Elaine. Ms. Turner, you have put your finger right on it. What I think we're looking at right now and moving forward, recommendation 1 is really, I think, it is the continuation of the status quo, where the NECs make a presentation and a recommendation to the committee and then the board. But what I think we're working toward, and this will be part and parcel of our work to upgrade, update our regs and a variety of other policies and procedures. And that would be really studying whether it is appropriate and or necessary to put in our law, our regulations, a ceiling for simulation, which BRN and a number of the other states do have, and which NCSBN has also recommended. So, it is a really good discussion point. So right now we haven't, over the past year or so, when it's really been a kind of a hot issue, we've not said you must. We've said that we think you should. But at this point, we want to have that discussion about, is it appropriate to set a ceiling or even a hard limit? I don't know that we would ever want to go through you can have 20% of this particular unit, but I think it's a lot more practical and a lot more flexible for the board to be able to say up to this percentage may be conducted via simulation. So I think we're going to get to that point with a real number, and I think we're going to get to that point pretty soon.
Okay, thank you. And so then the second question is, we hit upon the topic of having potentially a universal curriculum, and I'm sure that's a long-term project, but were any thoughts given to that issue at all?
Oh boy. That would be either loathed or loved by the community as a whole. But I love the idea of a universal curriculum. I think if you were listening to our hearing, I think there's a lot of interest in the Capitol about maybe not so much a universal curriculum, but a state standardized curriculum whereby a program could use it or then just adapt to their own, whether as long as it meets the established parameters. So I think, yes, the long story, of course, is that, yeah, that's going to be a substantial conversation, but it's not as far out as it may seem, because there's a vast amount of stuff that's pretty regular and pretty consistent from program to program. But yeah, this is something that we want to discuss. I mean, we're not, I don't think, anywhere close to ready to say, the committee will review this sample curriculum, this universal curriculum draft, and the board will approve it. But I think we are at a point where the staff and the board can be working together on really defining what that should look like. And there's a lot of research and analysis that would need to take place, both here, in contrast with, CNA curriculum and RN curriculum, but also around the country, because, every state does their VN and PN curriculum ever so slightly different. And of course, the psych techs, as you know, they don't really exist the way we have them configured, except for maybe 3 states as well as us. So there's a lot of real thinking. I mean, because actually, if you think about it, really the psych tech curriculum is the universal curriculum. So did that help at all?
Oh, yes, very good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I just have to add that a standardized curriculum would make it a lot easier to assign values for these different modalities. Just my plug. All right. So this is an ongoing discussion. Yes, Elaine? Actually, I should ask Beth. Yes?
I'm sorry. Yes, this is, and definitely for board members to, talk about as well, and maybe even have guidance or suggestions or their opinions would be great.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All right. I believe that we are ready to move on to discussion and possible action to make recommendations to the board on program approval process. Ms. Yamaguchi.
Oh boy, my favorite theme. We sent out a draft of a document that the staff worked on over the past few months, and the content of this document was knit into our response to the legislature's sunset background paper. What you see here is some ideas moving forward of how we could maintain the standards and the quality and the consumer safety, all the protections that we currently have in terms of approving process and programs, but possibly managing to make this whole process work a little bit more swiftly, a little bit more efficiently. I don't know that we've had this conversation recently, but I think it's fair to say that there are a lot of phases along the way in terms of the program approval, and not to take too much time, but as you know, we have a significant waiting list, and this has been a core point of concern and dissatisfaction from the legislature. We need to be able to move that list, and granted, the list itself grew to its epic proportions, partly because as we've been working forward since like 2017, 2018, as you'll recall, we were very much understaffed in terms of NECs. We had gotten to the point in 2019, end of 2019, where we were at this point fully staffed and ready to turn the corner and really start addressing that list. And then COVID came up, and the NECs found themselves spending about 90% of their day working with their programs, their assigned programs, to put out fires and to keep everyone running. So basically, all of last year, we managed to approve a couple of new programs, but not very many, and we added more. Now you couple that with the fact that because it's widely known in the community that we do plan to seek approval for the education program fees. BRN has had those in place since, I believe, 2016, 2017. So we believe that there have been a number of places where folks have just decided to get on the list before the program fees are assessed, thinking that, of course, they're sneaking in under the wire and aren't going to get charged, which may or may not be a good assumption. So there's a lot of factors involved here, and a number of factors as well that were completely out of our control, and that's people proposing programs and then not responding, not communicating. So there's a lot of reasons why our program approval list grew so large so quickly. But the fact is, the bottom line is, we need to address that. We need to make sure that we're looking and we're processing that list. And as everybody I think knows, we have a real need both in the state and out of the country to produce well-qualified, trained nurses and psych techs. That's just not a question. So what we have to do, I think, at this point, and again, we put these concepts into the sunset response, which the board voted on. But at this point, I think there are some things that we can do without legislative or regulatory approval, and so that would be that. Let's see, what page is that? Page 2, where it says possible changes. These are some things that we want to talk to this committee and then the full board about. Do we want to break up the list so we have separate lists for the public programs and the private programs? this might speed up the approval for the programs that are run through, county offices of ed and the community colleges. They have real strong programs. More often than not, they're located in communities that need a bit more economic development, that they need the career training opportunities. We think this is an interesting suggestion that we would want to.
Elaine?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but again, not being an educator, and I've looked at this and I've read through the possible changes, but can you just go over them and give me the thought processes behind why the recommendations are to make these changes?
Sure.
Because that would help me be more aligned with this conversation. Otherwise, I'm sitting here going I'm like, well, why would we want to maintain separate lists? Well, I don't even know what a waiting period is in active phases. So, if you could go over those possible changes, that would be great.
Absolutely. So the idea behind separate lists would be, I think, to accelerate the approval for public programs, and to which I think is really good for the overall state of California. And that, of course, may just be me, but generally speaking, the community college and the county office of ed programs have much lower fees. They're located in areas that have been situated to specifically address, lack of opportunity for careers for people. In other words, they're oftentimes in economically depressed areas, underserved areas. Those programs tend to have very strong results, and I think they're very sturdy, if you will. So the logic there, of course, is with or without the approval of the program fee, by making the public programs more accessible, in other words, more opportunities, wider availability, we are serving, I think, a real serious need for the nursing training, as well as for career path for a lot of underserved people. That would be the logic. I'm sorry?
Would we then say that we're going to approve, let's say we're going to try and approve 2 schools, we would do 1 public, 1 private. Is that the thought process that would behind the separate list?
Something like that. I think when Marie is assigning programs off the list to an NEC, she would assign something like that. So each NEC would receive 1 public and 1 private program to work on until there was no program proposals on the public list, and then they would go strictly on order through the private programs. It needs to be discussed and gamed out, but yeah, that was kind of the conversation.
Thank you.
Sure. So the waiting period, actually, that's discussed in a bit more detail of the says new approval process scenario for discussion. What right now, and this has worked real well for the board for many, many years, but right now, if a program says we want to start a new program, our staff says, great, here's your number, and we'll be calling you when you're somewhere about a year to 6 months away from being actually assigned to an NEC. So by breaking up the waiting period into these active phases, there's more contact and there's more ability for the programs to work to get ready, because candidly, a lot of the things that have taken the most time for the program to work through to be approved is having their complete curriculum that meets all the requirements, to have their complete set of policies, admissions, attendance, fees, and to have a qualified program director. That's not even counting the part of, do you actually have a venue? Do you actually have an address to facilities? But these areas, the curriculum, the policies, and the program areas, this has been a stumbling block in so many cases. And as a subset, the program directors it seems like a lot of them are brand new to that field and don't really understand. But there's a significant number of program directors who have been working at another program quite successfully, and they don't need as much orienting and training, but these newer people do. And so if we wait until this program has been waiting for 2 years and is now working on the active work with the NECs to get their program finally approved, if they don't have a qualified program director, they're starting from scratch right then. So they've basically been sitting for a couple of years maybe. But to break it up so that there are more phases that, at phase 1, you're doing this, you're providing this, you're starting to work on this with your NEC. It's not an accident, by the way, that we've also kind of matched the phases with, I think, a broken up program approval fee. Now, BRN actually has a different approach, and I don't know whether I quite have the moxie to do so, but basically when you send in your letter of intent to BRN, they say, okay, send me your check for $25,000, $40,000, and we'll put you on the list. And granted, their list is shorter and moves quicker, but at the same time, that's a lot of money to be putting up front. The plus side of that, of course, is that to be able to do that indicates a program that has a lot of resources already, that is already prepared and has a lot in the queue ready to go. This has been a failing, I think, for some programs that have just, yeah, we want to have a program, but we're just gonna, wait until you guys tell us what that means. So I think that the idea of the phased approval process, it may not totally speed things up, but it makes things, I think, work better. There's more communication, there's more collaboration, there's more ability to provide and make sure that this curriculum and these policies meet the regulations, meet our requirements. So that would be, as I said, that the scenario for discussion, the new approval process, that this is just kind of our thinking through of how this could look. And so that, I think, is a real potential game changer in the way the programs are moved through the process. I think part of that is number 3 here, developing a questionnaire. One of the things we don't do is assess a program's, I don't know, readiness or I don't want to say value, but I think the need for the program, because right now, the trend that we're seeing most of the time is that programs are proposing to have a new school, a new program in areas that are kind of burgeoning. So we've seen like a big boom in, say, Orange County, Riverside County, San Diego County, but we're not seeing people really taking advantage of the fact that there are serious economic, educational, and healthcare needs in the northern part of the state, in the Central Valley. So one of the things we thought about doing, and again, you gotta remember, of course, that these are all points that we want the committee and the board to discuss. But what if we did actually a more not forced, but a more pointed triaging, ranking, if you will, of proposals, so that if they propose their program and they set forth their answers, their description of why they want this program to be in this area, what they're going to charge their students, are they certain that the region can support this? And to avoid, I think, the Brightwood type situations, we want to see some financial stability here. Could they possibly fold without any warning and then leave the students high and dry like Brightwood did. So I think there's a lot of factors that we might want to see in an initial application so that it ceases to be more of a, yeah, we want to introduce a program and we'll work with you, to a, we want to create a program and this is the value we think we can provide to the state. So, and then obviously part 4 then is we would need to have, I think, that process of analyzing and scoring the applications, ranking them. I think actually this is the perfect role for this committee and the board of doing this in a public meeting, talking about the need here that this proposal seeks to address, to talk about this is way too expensive a program for this region, or these people, obviously have a great track record and have produced terrific high quality nurses and psych techs. We would be happy to see them open up in Bakersfield or Fresno or Merced. So like I said, this would be like, again, a more active process, and I think it produces, I think, a tighter pool of applicants. Again, basically we would be ensuring that the people who are moving forward in the process are prepared, are qualified, and basically are helping to meet a societal economic need. So I think, as I said, I think I've talked about number 5 already, but number 6, I think, is a key here, and that's setting limits on communication lapses and creating this inactive list policy idea. So one of the things we've encountered over the years, pardon me, has been the fact that some proposals move very quickly because the people involved are very eager and very prepared, and they respond to communications, and their back and forth is effective and efficient of, and the NEC says, I need to see this document. Here it is. But then we also see the opposite of that. We see people who basically don't respond for a month, 2 months, 3 months. We see people who basically have disappeared. And so they've been kind of left in consideration, and by keeping them, actively on the list, the NEC can't just, move ahead to somebody else. What we think is fair is to say, you will respond within X number of weeks. You will provide these points of information, this information to NEC within X number of days or weeks. Otherwise, after a couple of failures, and you gotta be fair and safe and sensitive and compassionate here, but with a few exceptions. I mean, because if somebody says, that recent fire kind of took out everything we owned, so we're a little behind. Totally understandable. But I'm sorry, I've been in Europe, so I couldn't have put that information together for you. Maybe not so fine, but I think setting forth some stricter requirements for communication and responsiveness from the programs and the proposers, I think also helps us to again move the process along a little bit with a little bit more alacrity. So let me pause here again for comments and questions.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. So again, issues to explore. We talked a bit about this. We talked a bit about universal curriculum already, and it would be a project to do. Bullet 2, focusing NECs solely on program approval and rotating that. I think this is an issue this is an option that I'm not real happy about. I don't like this idea so much because I think I think having the NEC's workload more balanced with the active programs and proposed programs, I think is a better system and keeps everybody current, as well as I think you develop that stronger relationship moving forward. So I don't know about that one, but we wanted to put down every possible option. Option 3, creating a new policy for existing programs. This is something that comes up a whole lot. You get the bigger private programs who have a really good track record, who want to use the same policies, the same curriculum, and they have a terrific program in, say, Orange County, and they want to open a new program in Riverside using all the same, curriculum and programs. Should there be a separate policy for expansion of those programs, so that they can just, not be on this general waiting list, but a much more swift and nimble process. Now, the benefit of that, of course, is that, we move a lot more nimbly and we have more programs more quickly. But then this also is almost exclusively benefiting the private sector. But this is something that I think the board needs to discuss and make a policy, a decision, a resolution here about, do we want to keep the current pattern, which I think tries very hard to keep the publics and privates pretty much on the same footing, or do we want to see a larger expansion, a faster expansion of the private sector? Can this be balanced, by the way, of just as we were talking about earlier, of separating the list so that there's a public list and a private list, and possibly being able to work with State Department of Ed or whomever to create more incentives or new policies, new budget language, or something that would enhance a public program's ability to develop a new program, to expand an existing program. There's a lot of things that could be done that. And that, of course, is the same thing of, establishing a policy to equalize the system. A 2-year moratorium. This is something, again, that I'm not at all keen on, but I think that I think the NECs might argue with me about this. This is something that this board was criticized very bitterly about in 16 and 17. That there was just I think in basically set forth by the EO at the time, that basically they would not accept any new proposals. It's a possibility that, given the size of our list right now, maybe we would be better served by saying, until this date, we will not accept any new applications. Again, a point to discuss. An idea that I do like quite a lot is if we would be able to work with the legislature, the public universities, to create a public service incentive program. You see this in a lot of sectors, that like a loan assumption or a credit program, so that even if you attended a private school, if you guarantee that you will spend like the next the first year or two working in a public service capacity, part of your loan burden gets forgiven, or you earn certain numbers of credits on the back end. Again, this is something that is something to explore, but it would require a number of partners. One thing that I discussed with some members in the legislature would be, why don't we just have third-party organizations process and approve all schools? And well, I think that takes Again, not my favorite recommendation, not my favorite idea, but it is something to think about because I'm sure that there are some states that do it that way. But it removes the board's authority to basically regulate and discipline, if necessary, a program that is out of compliance. It doesn't always mean that they will be treated with as much attention and to detail that the NECs currently do. Again, something to discuss. We thought about examining some of the labor intensive work processes, like the programs that are on provisional status. There are, comparatively speaking, very few of those, but they take a vast amount of the NEC's time to work with that program to make sure that they're working on the issues of concern and the potential violations. We want to think about, can we improve that process? Is there a way to make that shorter? And finally, the last issue we want to talk about is increase and or diversify the staffing. What this means, this is something that we've talked about a bit, is it possible? And I've had some preliminary conversations with OHR here at the department. One of the concepts that we've talked about a bit at a staff level is so much of the work involved in the school approval process must be done right now by an NEC. And we always get asked, why can't some of this work be done by a trained analyst at the AGPA level or something? And while I think that that's a possibility, one, there need to be such a intensive training program, but two, there are so many subtleties involved in program approval that to have somebody who was not just, intimately aware of what that school program should look like, what that curriculum should look like. So one of the things we had talked about a bit is the possibility of, could we have as part of our education division and staff LVNs and PTs who could then work in tandem with the NECs to really, I think, assess facilities and programs and faculty. And from that understanding of, they went through this program and they'll remember what worked for them, what didn't work for them, what these things should look like. So this is something that we had talked about. It would require, this would be a very, very long-term process in making sure that we could get approval to hire folks from that rank. But I think it's still a really interesting concept, and I think it's something that could, I think, really help spread our resources a little while. So, questions on any of those? Apologize for moving too quickly, possibly.
Okay, yeah, Miss Turner, Cheryl Turner. So yeah, I agree with you about the moratorium. I'm not too keen on that, or in referring out the approval process to a third party. I think we've already temporarily started referring our case review of licensees out, and I think we should continue to try to work within our authority over this, and that we should have the ability to approve programs or not. But I know this is an ongoing discussion, so it doesn't stop here. Yeah, and so the moratorium, yeah, we need to just figure out again how to craft a procedure to get through these approvals, rather than put a stop to them, because there's such a great need for nurses and psych techs now, and so we need educational facilities that can help them, pass their exam and become practicing professionals. And so, and do you think that we can increase our staffing with our current issues regarding our budget and the projected shortfall that we're expecting while we're waiting to have a fee approval to help us cover our expenses?
Once again, you have absolutely put your finger on it. I don't know. In fact, I strongly doubt it. I think given the current structure we have, without the approval from the state to change the way our staffing pattern does stuff, in other words, to get like active licensees to work through the board, really our alternatives here are to submit budget change proposals for additional NECs. Now, what I find is interesting is BRN does not have a vastly larger number of schools, but they have close to double the number of NECs approved. They don't have them hired right now, but they're approved to have quite a few more than we do. So I think that's possibly the more solid footing, but you're right. Our budget position right now, it isn't supportive of us creating even quite a modest increase in staffing to move forward. But this is something that takes a long time to put in place. So if we had the certainty that, for example, the school fee would be approved this year, we could, for example, start planning for asking for a budget augmentation next year to move forward. But I think your initial point, though, is really the stronger one, and that is that we must evaluate our process now and figure out a way to make it work more smoothly. Now, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was listening to you.
Oh, okay. So I think at this point, we are waiting on the legislature. These issues and these concepts were put into our response. And I think you might recall from your read of our response that one of the things that we recommended to the legislature was if you would consider authorizing the board to have a 2 or 3 year pilot program where we could put these ideas into practice right now. As of January 1, we wouldn't have to wait for statute and we wouldn't have to wait for rulemaking. We would be able to do this based on the assumption that this would change the path. And then we would, obviously be reporting on status and successes. I'm very hopeful about that, by the way. But we are, of course, forced to wait right now, and we will probably not have a real definite, indication, yay or nay, from the legislature. I would say probably before July. But in the meantime, though, of course, I think the NECs, Marie and the NECs have been already looking at a number of steps that we can take right now to sort of not so much streamline the process, but to be a little bit more ambitious and a little bit more targeted and focused. So, and I know Marie will be probably reporting on her work with the list in a bit. But like I said, these are things that we want to discuss, but they're all kind of put it into our response to the sunset paper. And so there are at this point points to discuss with the legislature. Now, not to put too fine a point on that, obviously, if we're going to need to, I think, have a good amount of conversation with our stakeholders, because some of the things we're proposing here are seemingly very minor and very soft, we think, but some programs, this may be a complete deal breaker for them. There may be issues that we didn't even think about. There may be ways to re-evaluate some of these options and issues. So as I said, we probably must start thinking through a process of stakeholder outreach. I had thought to do this starting in the summer. Madam Chair, any comments or questions?
I just really appreciate the idea of having some psych techs and some LVNs on staff. And I wonder if you guys played with the idea of what their role would be. I mean, I assume they would be assisting the NECs, which this whole thing just makes so much sense. I sat here thinking, why didn't somebody come up with this idea before?
We did. Actually, I tried to sell OHR on this 2 years ago, and they said, you can't do it. The state personnel board will not allow one of the boards to put the licensed population in your own staff. So, but you know, these things are meant to be discussed. I'm sure there's a way.
Doesn't the BRN, they have nurses in their own staff?
Ah, yes, they do.
Sorry to bring that up.
No, exactly, which is why I say that this is something that needs some discussion. And I think as leadership changes and as the really the strong, desperate need of our state, our community to have qualified healthcare professionals,
Yeah.
you know, I think certain things are going to outweigh the policies that the state personnel board says no.
Definitely food for thought, that's for sure.
Yes.
All right, any other comments? Are you ready to move on to number 9?
This is
Discussion.
Donna. I wanted to.
Go ahead, Donna.
Okay, sorry. I have to like try and unmute the computer and the phone, and it gets when one goes off, the other goes on, so it's kind of difficult. I did want to weigh in here. I think all of the issues to explore, I think all of them are worthy of exploration. I do have an angst around the moratorium, just having lived through the moratorium before and the negativity that was surrounding that. I think the rest of these, and even that one is still something that we certainly can explore. I also like the idea of being able to do a pilot so that we can get some movement and see if perhaps these changes that are allowable would make things better. So I actually like that idea as well. And then I also think, I've always thought since I've been on this board that why don't we have LVNs and PTs that are assisting the NECs? It just seems like a no-brainer to me that that should happen. It would also extend the, like, if this is what you think is happening, then you could have some people that actually do the work going like, well, yes, that really is happening. It's almost like the voice of the frontline worker. And then in addition to that, I can certainly see how at first glance, a statement might be made like you can't have licensees developing their own curriculum. That would seem to be a conflict. But in this case, I don't think they would be. I think they would be working with the NECs, and there would be parameters and things. And I think it's a great use of. It would be a cost savings to the board, and also it would broaden the knowledge. And I think it would be a huge benefit to going that way. So I'm hoping that we can continue to further explore that. I think it's also probably a good idea. The NECs would know this more. Again, people that do the work know how to do the work the best. Maybe they should have some that are focused solely on approval work, or I will divert to them to be able to decide if that's a good thing for them. But I think all of these issues to explore are worthy of further explanation or further exploration, and should be looked at to try and get us out of this current situation that we find ourselves in. And then I also just want to comment on I like the fact that we are now looking at, or we plan to look at, Do we really need another school in this area? We do need to be able to balance out the number of licensees, the number of available jobs that are out there, the likelihood that people can become employed after going through school, with the number of schools that we have. So I'm happy that we are taking a look at that as well. So that's all the comments that I wanted to make. Thank you.
All right, we are now ready to move on to number 9, discussion and possible action to make recommendations to the board on joint in-service sessions with Board of Registered Nursing. Ms. Yamaguchi?
This should actually be quite quick. I had a lengthy conversation with our fellows at BRN, their EO and their AEO. They were kind of impressed and envious, let's just say, of our in-service programs over the past few months, talking first about the nationwide trends and then simulation and clinicals. So we talked a little bit about, were there any areas that naturally would cover both of our boards' purviews? Some of the ideas that we've been talking about include obviously the next generation of the NCLEX, the nurse licensure compact, things in that matter, and again, more on the national trends of nursing needs and nursing training. So one of the things that we had talked about a bit was, was there a way that we could put together, a partial or half day with both of our boards, and panels of some experts and some folks to provide some background. So I think this is a real exciting development. I'm really optimistic about that, but I'd be real interested in hearing any ideas that the committee might have about some things that you think would really, I think, lend itself well to that kind of joint session.
Elaine, I think you covered a bunch of them. The things that we have in common, and I know that this just keeps coming up, the whole thing with the compact states and whether or not we should be in a compact. And I think this is just it's a big topic right now. That and the whole thing of this smoothly moving from one level to another, which I know the BRN is looking at because they've been at these meetings. So
Carol, you're fading in and out. I'm not getting all of what you're saying.
sorry, I think my internet is unstable.
Okay, so pipeline, I think I can add that to the list too. That sounds great. So stay tuned. We'll be working with our colleagues and putting together a program. Probably not for May, but maybe August or November soon.
That actually sounds excellent. So we're ready to move on. Updates from Supervising Nursing Education Consultant, Ms. Cordera.
Hi, thank you, Carol. First of all, I'd like to thank Beth DeYoung for that enlightening presentation on the future of nursing education, because it's quite as you can imagine, it's quite a hot topic right now, and something that the NECs live daily. So and thank you for the support from the board. We really the committee, and hopefully the board too, we really appreciate it. I wanted to just speak just a few minutes on the proposed programs, because I know that's a big concern for everyone, and I'd like to just let you know the progress that we have made and moving forward, what our plan is. And of course, I will keep you updated at each Education and Practice Committee as to where we are. So what we did, we took the top 11 programs, 1 through 11, and we vetted them. Vetted meaning we developed a checklist. We wanted to see where they were in the process. To find out their readiness to be assigned to an NEC. So those emails went out, and all but one responded. We have a Teams meeting set up for next week, the 29th of April, at which time they will meet and greet their NECs. The NECs will all be on the Teams meeting, in addition to the administrators, and we've asked them to, if they have an identified program director, we'd like that program director to be on the Teams meeting also. During that meeting, we will review the Nursing Practice Act. I say we don't have any PT schools in that top 11, so just Nursing Practice Act for VNs, and also our program record survey, which is the tool that the NECs use for new programs and also for continued approval. So we go through that document. It's a big document, about 60 pages, but we want them to be very familiar with that, because that will expedite, if they can follow that tool, that could expedite their progress with their proposed program being approved. We're going to talk a lot about communication, because as Elaine mentioned, sometimes where the hang up is that we might not hear, the NEC might not hear from a program director for 3 or 4 months. And then that NEC is sitting there with a potential program on their caseload, and they're anticipating, hopefully, that program director will contact them, and then I can't move another program to an NEC until we can kind of close that loop. And I think that is addressed, closing that loop, the communication loop, in this document that I believe you have and that we prepared for you. So, so that's the first 11. Then emails went out to numbers 12 through 60. Yes, we do have 60 proposed programs on the list. So an email went out to numbers 12 through 60, asking them to to review their letter of intent, which they submitted, and we wanted to make sure that the information is current. I can't tell, because I dealt with the first 11, and I can't tell you how many times emails came back. I had to call. The information is not complete or not correct. So numbers 12 through 60, we sent an email out and said, please review this letter of intent and make any corrections that you have. Down the road, probably the next month or so, it's my intention to have, again, another Teams meeting with the numbers 12 through 60 to basically sort of, just start the communication process with them, perhaps introduce the concept of the Program Record Survey and the Practice Act, and let them know what the process is, so that they feel that they're not just left out in the cold, that they are important to us and we are concerned about them. So, and I might want to say the numbers 12 through 60, we so far have 11 emails that were undeliverable. So I don't know what that means. I will follow up with them with a phone call and or a certified letter. If that doesn't do it, they're just coming off the list because we can't get a hold of them. So anyway, that is the NEC and mind plan for the proposed program, and certainly we welcome any comments, questions, concerns. that you might have, but there is a plan in place. So, questions, comments?
That sounds amazing, and it sounds like you've done amazing work trying to reach out to all these schools. And I really wasn't surprised when 10 of them never even got back to you.
Oh, I know it's very frustrating because you think they'd be standing at the ready because it's important to them. And many of them have responded to us, but I think, 11 that have not. And we have a time frame. They have till next Friday to send their corrected letter of intent in to make those corrections. So we still have a week. So we'll see who responds to us. But that's our plan.
So Marie, thank you for the report and thank you for everything that you're doing. The only thing I can add is that it's really not a communication expectation, and maybe if we rephrase it, it's actually a response expectation. Perhaps these schools think that by the fact that you communicated with them, that was all that was expected, and they saw it and they didn't even respond to it. So maybe we should rephrase this as a response expectation and not a communication expectation.
Well, thank you, Donna. That's a good point. However, we did ask them to respond, and I mean, if you want to call it response or communication, but part of the process with the NEC is that they have to keep that communication or response. With a sort of, it's similar, but that's definitely certainly response. We can use that term too. Maybe that's something that people would respond to, I guess. I don't know, but thank you for that. Anything else on proposed programs?
Marie, this is Doris. I have my hand up.
Hello, Doris.
Hey, I was just taking a couple notes, and I wanted to get the firm number out of how many people you made contact with, out of how many didn't respond.
Yes, so
Undeliverable.
yes, so there was two groups that we submitted a communication/response to. One was the numbers 1 through 11, and out of that group, 1 through 11, one has not responded, and the deadline was last week, so it's way past the deadline. The second group, which is number 12 through 60, it's not, I mean, the emails came back as undeliverable, which I still have to follow up and try to reach out to them. So as I said, I will reach out via a phone call to the number that's identified on the letter of intent, and also a certified letter to the address that is identified on the letter of intent.
Wow, and that was a count of 10?
That was 10. Yes.
10. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all.
Mm-hmm. No more questions? Okay, if there's no more questions, I just have one other comment. Our DCA travel ban has been lifted, yay, and the NECs are anxious to get out and make their site visits to the programs. We have a good majority of our NECs who are fully vaccinated, and those are the only ones that are going out into the field right now. So we have this month and next month, probably the next 3 months, we've got quite a few site visits. So we're excited about that because, it's time. It's been over a year that we haven't been out, and we're anxious to get out there. Thank you. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you. We'll move on to number 11, discussion and possible action to make recommendations to the board. Should I read? Please note the nursing education consultants make recommendations. The recommendations are forwarded to one or more of the executive officer review, education and practice committee, or the full board for action. So this is the consideration of placement of program on provisional approval, Carrington College, Sacramento Vocational Nursing Program. Dr. McLeod?
Thank you and good afternoon. This is a follow-up to a report that was done in January to the committee to consider to put Carrington on provisional. At that time, it was decided to give them more time. They had 5 violations at that time. It was decided to give them more time to take care of their violations. So they were given an additional 2 months to work on those violations and take care of them. At this point, they presented me material in the middle of March, and they have cleared all 5 violations. They have adjusted their policy for letting me know when they have faculty that have resigned, and they have actually told me of 2 faculty that have resigned since they have changed their policy. They have also taken care of looking at their remediation policy, and have actually done a presentation with their faculty to tighten their remediation policy so that everyone is following the requirements. They are also took care of the fact that they had literally too many students in one of their classes. One of their students has since dropped, so that has been corrected. And they were having a problem with the CNA. They were not looking at CNA education in their policy, and that has also been corrected. So we are now asking to rescind that request for provisional status and have them continue as they are, and asking for a class to the BBN TET each time they want to do a class.
Dr. McLeod, is your recommendation to maintain the status quo then?
Yes, that is my recommendation.
If
So-
that's the case, I don't think board action would be necessary. My recommendation would be for the committee simply to adopt the recommendation to maintain the status quo, and the matter can be, need not be taken up at the full board meeting.
Mr. Swenson, do we need a motion for that?
It would be best practice to make a motion that the recommendation of the nurse education consultant be adopted, and that the earlier recommendation be dropped from the calendar. The revised recommendation be adopted and the earlier recommendation be dropped from the calendar for the upcoming board meeting.
Is there a
This
motion?
is Donna. I so move.
Thank you. I'll second that. I'd like to take a roll call vote. Ms. Turner?
Dr. Mountain, could we have opportunity to hear from the program if they're available and for public
yes.
comment?
Thank you. I forgot. Is the program here?
Yes, they are. Ms. Parkman, I have unmuted your microphone. You're free to speak.
Yeah, we're here, and thank you. We did work really hard to get rid of all the violations.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Parkman. Are there other comments? Should we call for other comments? Public comments?
There are none at this time.
Thank you. I'd like to take a roll call vote. Ms. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Norton?
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so that's unanimous. All right.
Thank you.
I believe we're ready to move to number 12. Public comment on items not on the agenda. The committee may not discuss or take any action on any items raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Moderator, do we have any public comments? Does anyone have their hand up?
There are none.
Thank you very much. Seeing none, we'll move to the next one. Recommendations for agenda items for future committee meetings. The committee may not discuss or take any action on any items raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Are there comments from the board or suggestions for future agenda items?
I see no hands raised in the audience.
Thank you. Seeing none, I believe it is time for number 14, which is the adjournment. And we will adjourn this meeting at 3:58 p.m. on 4/19/2021. Thank you guys so much for coming and for your participation.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.